Welcome to Ulua. You live, you work, you art.
Hello, everyone. This is Carol again. And finally, we have this episode about West and East thinking. And it will be according to the view of a person whose name is André. I don't know if it's pronounced correctly, Haudricourt, something like that. He's French. He was French. He was a person that I think this essay, I will leave as always the picture of the book. The important part is that he was an agricultural engineer, but he was super curious, and so he investigated and researched about during his travels. He traveled to Russia, Vietnam, all the Southeast Asia, and doing not only working in his profession, which was agriculture, but also working and understanding and a lot about linguistic stuff and that kind of thing. And even though he never wrote a book per se, he has articles in French around here and there. And so I found this book one day, which is called something like The Cultivation of Gestures Between Plants, Animals, and Humans. In Spanish, it is El cultivo de los gestos entre plantas, animales y humanos. And it's by Editorial Cactus here in Argentina, for example. You can find it. I don't know about the rest of the world, but it's like 15 pages or so, the first part. And he talks about his view on the differences he could make up from, he could understand, I mean, from the West and the East, especially based on two things. That it was the way the people think about transcendence or about the future, about, for example, how they could level up, we could say, in society, or if they have some ways to advance in the hierarchy of classes and that kind of thing. It was one aspect that he talks about. And the other one is about how we treat ourselves, or in a specific, for example, in the East or the West, we treat ourselves among other people, between humans, and also how we treat our animals and the plants. So based on those two premises, which seem like for me, it's like a new approach, even though it was written in 1949, if I don't remember incorrectly. I can actually see now because I'm kind of well, I need my glasses, but I don't want to wear them all the time. And and yeah, so it's actually like 100 years ago, but it's not that well known. And I've been thinking about if this is still relevant today because it's so old, right? But I think it is. Of course, keeping these main points in mind. So we will be talking about this today, and I will highlight some of the things that he says. But if you can find this book, it's really short to read and it's amazing. So I think it gives a lot of food for thinking, which I call mindwich instead of sandwich. It's mindwich. Um, just nonsense from my part. But yeah, I think it's really important for you to read it and take out your own conclusions. So I will share with you the things I could gather from this. And I think it's really very rich, and it has a lot of data that I won't be sharing with you because otherwise you have to read it out loud, and I don't think it's necessary for the case. But it really has data, very interesting data about the places he talks about and about the ways people think regarding those two topics. So, a mate, and then we can start.
Disclaimer time.
Okay, I want to make a little disclaimer here because I think it's important to know that I have been grown in the West, so my upbringing is mostly like Greek mentality, we could say, because we descend as Westerner from that kind of perspective, that kind of idea, and even though I will be talking about the things that Haudricourt says in his essay, I will be putting in also my words into it, and maybe you will find that it seems like oversimplified, but it is for the purpose of just talking what it is about and to give us this food for thought, which I call languages, like sandwiches for the mind. And I think it's the main idea is for us to talk about these things and to reflect more than just reading a book, because you can go find this book and read it. So I will giving you my experience, some ideas that I have from this read, and also again, I cannot help but I actually did like kind of a table for myself with the columns and everything, just organize my thoughts after reading and after thinking about this, because I cannot help to think in my Greek way of thinking. We could say we tend, as Westerners, we have been taught how to approach problems or thinking in categories, relationships, but mostly between categories and functions. So we don't actually, I don't think I will ever think like an Orient person or like an Eastern person, because I was born in this side of the world, and my main years were spent as a Westerner. My main years, I mean, the most crucial years of my life, when you form your thinking, when you form, even though you can change and modify it and learn a little, huge amounts of things. But I think that there are some things like are kind of fixed, we could say. I don't know. But I don't think I will ever be able to think as an Eastern person. So, yeah, I wanted to say that. So take also into in mind that I will be talking like in categories, and the article is not specifically, it has some titles and things, but it, for example, it won't specifically be talking about business, but I will be adding my perspective from what I've seen, and yeah, I will be putting some input into it. And also remember that this article is from the 1949, so it's almost like 100 years old, but I think it still applies today in that we can have so many things to think about, and from a complete and different perspective that we generally see, because we generally see or read about this kind of thing. East is abstract thing. They are abstract thinkers. Some others say no, they're concrete thinkers. We will maybe talk about that a little bit. Others say no, they think as a whole. They think in holistic ways, and yeah, that's how most of us already know this type of distinction between East and West. So, and also there is no specific line we can trace and say this is West and this is East in the world. We just have this conception in mind. We could say that the West is mostly Europe and the American continent, maybe, and the West is like all the rest of the world. Australia could also be considered sorry, I mixed up things. So we could say that the Americas and Europe are the Westerners, and also Australia, we could say, because we have like because of our history as nations and that kind of thing. And we could say the Southeast Asia or Asia, India, China, Japan. We could say they are the East. I don't know exactly where to put Africa here, so if you can say something about that, but I think maybe it could be part of the East, because we don't have that much information. At least I don't have. I don't know. So if you want to comment about that, it will be appreciated. Now we can come back to the episode.
Now back to your episode.
So, okay, I will start with the way people think according to Haudricourt. I will call him. I don't know if it's pronounced correctly again. But he says, for example, that in the East, on the Oriental countries, and he, during his talk, his essay, he talks about on one side about India mostly and China. So those are the most representative country he takes to express this. So and he also says, of course, you cannot take just one culture, because the East, the Orient is super extensive, and every country has the particular things, and the same happens in the West. We as Occidental people, we have different countries, and a different country has a different culture, but it's a generalization, of course. So he says, regarding, for example, this, the main idea he wants to convey, I will start with that. He says that in the East, people are more, it's like a big garden. So they have like a mindset of the gardener instead, or compared to the West, where people tend to be more pastoral. So we are like a big pen with cattle. That's the comparison. Those are my words. He never says cattle or anything, but I just wanted to make a mental picture of that, and because it helps me understand what he is saying. And this big pen that we have with all the cattle, we could say, or the sheep, needs a shepherd, and that shepherd is the guide or the leader of the place, for example. And I can see that really happens in our countries, because we always want a leader to guide us or to save us, to be the big hero. So that's the main point in the West. However, in the East, people tend to treat things like they are the gardeners, like they are, I make this in my head like a coach. They invite others to move in a certain direction, and they don't have any bosses. Nobody's bossing anyone around. Nobody's leading. Nobody's pushing others. It's just the way things happen, and they don't have slaves, for example. They never had slaves. And well, as I said, he tells, he cites a lot of data here that is really important if you can look at it. He tells a story about these two mentalities, or these two mindsets that we have. And for example, in India and China, they didn't have any slaves, whereas in Occidental countries, he says, for example, the Greeks, when they conquered, they had slaves, because they conquered other countries that were their neighbors, and their neighbors had similar skills. For example, when the Romans conquered, they also gained some territory from that was before from the Greeks and that kind of thing, and they have like the general knowledge spread and the technical skills were the same. I mean, between Greece and maybe Persia and maybe all those countries that were in conflict at the time. However, so they conquered and then they enslaved the people that they conquered because they could make use of them and they could get free labor, basically. Of course, I'm oversimplifying with my words this work, but that's the idea. And on the contrary, in the East, for example, China, if they wanted outside their walls, China walls, they couldn't have slaves because there were barbarians. There were people that were just living in a nomadic state, so they were traveling from one way to the other, or they didn't have any skills, so they can make use of. That is his assumption that why China couldn't have any slaves. And also in India, they had this system of castes. So slavery is also not an option there. And that is why he thought that maybe the mindset of these people from the East and the West were completely different regarding the way they were, the way they were organizing their people. And I find that's really interesting, and I think maybe it's a good explanation. And really, and for me, a new point of view, even though it's old, as I was saying. So yeah, in the West, we had, as I say again, slavery. So there were certain classes of people, that the bosses and the slaves, right? And there was just the way it was all the time. So there was always a leader or a boss, and also had to guide or take care of the slaves. He had to manage them. He had to keep them fed. He had to maybe sometimes move from a city to another. The slaves, they were like cattle, we could say. Of course, I'm talking super lightly about this topic. It's huge. And in the East, they didn't have that problem. And even though there were some castes in India and also in China, we could say, like, there were some distinct classes. There was the feudals and the people that was working in the fields. But this distinction wasn't really a problem. There was not a war between them. It was just the way things were, or in some cases still are in Orient. They tend to be content, or sorry, they tend to be okay with the way that they are organized. And for example, in India, if you are born in a certain caste, you accept that's your reality, and you also are respectful of the other castes. So again, slavery was not an option in those countries. But then I continue. And for example, regarding the relationship with the animals, as we mentioned, they also were respectful in the East, super respectful to the animals. If you see, for example, in India, they roam freely the streets. They are just, we could say, taken advantage of. I mean, use their potential. For example, the cows are used for milking. After the cows are old, they are liberated. That's why they roam free in the streets. So they don't have to punish or I don't know, like slap their animals in the face. And that also translates into how they treat themselves, because everybody has, and I'm mixing things here, as you can see, because everyone and everything has a soul. That's the conception of the East. So if everybody has a soul, then they need to be respected, right? Because you don't know if you are disrespecting maybe some other people that was reincarnated into an animal, or into another thing, or into another person. So they are super respectful on the caste and that. And regarding also the animals, they prefer, even in China, for example, they prefer to have pigs because the pigs take care of themselves. So they don't have to take them from one place to another in order for the pigs to be fed, for example. They just grow there, and they don't need that much supervision, we could say. However, in the West, cattle, or we need shepherds, as I said before. The shepherds are the ones that leading the animals, sometimes even punishing them if they have to. And as this leader or this hero is also like entitled, we could say, to treat others like that too, because we are, of course, this is generally, we are in a society from the West, in the West, that's like paternalistic, and we tend to trust, for example, I don't know, in a governor, or in a person, the president, and that kind of thing. So we trust our bosses to lead us, and we just follow. It's like this thing of the cattle or the sheep following the leader, the pastor, or that kind of thing, the shepherd, sorry. And also in religion, yes, we could say the pastor. In religion, we follow these figures, or this person that's like above us, like our bosses, like they have some, like a hero, or they have some specifically a specific role in the society, and the majority of the people just follows them. However, for example, in the East, they have like a more holistic approach, and so they think more about the consciousness of people, or how they will be transcending, and the souls that everybody has. It's like more like a flattened hierarchy, whereas in the West we have like specific and vertical roles. So yeah, I think this is really interesting, and actually I could also translate this into business. And if you know, in the West, when you have to do business, the most important thing for the Eastern people, maybe in India, maybe in Indonesia, maybe in China, people are like most worried about the relationship and keeping the relationship with you, if they are working with you, or if they are selling something to you, or you are selling something to them. So they are really interested in keeping the relationship and understand it, if you are okay with them, if they are super polite and that kind of thing. And they're not that interested. Of course, they are interested in money and having a good relationship and a good self, for example, but that's not the main focus. And in the West, it is. we are more competitive and we want to win. We want to be the ones having the best sell first thing, the revenue, the most or the biggest revenue, and we are always measuring that kind of thing between each other. And yeah, I think that could be applied to business, right?
And what else? I read. I have some notes here. Another thing is that.
Remember that I said that in the East, everybody has a soul, so they have to be respected just because they exist. And however, in our culture, I could say in the West, we generally separate us. Like if we have a mind and we have a body, the material part and the spiritual part are completely separated. We are not just one person. Whereas in the other, we are a whole thing. And we don't care in the West so much about respecting other people's soul, for example, especially if we are doing business, right? So that's another thing that I think it's really important. And in the West, we need to manage, we need to lead, we need to be the one guiding the others. And again, in the East, I have worked, for example, in the East, and I could see that the bosses are just part of the team, and they are not someone that's above everyone. And that's completely different from what we see here in the West, or we used to see. Because right now we have some methods that tend to level that thing. But at the same time, I think now, and after reading this book, actually I've read this like 4 years ago, and now I read it again, and I realized that maybe that is why, for example, some methodologies, let's say agile methodologies, don't really stick into this side of the world in the West, because I think we don't have that exact mindset as in the East. And in the East, they don't actually need it because they're just the way they are wired to act like this. So that's a thought. Anyways, well, that's too much information in just one sit. But yeah, it's really helpful, this book. And also I could speak, for example, about, because this person was an agricultural engineer, and he talked also about the techniques and the tools. We said about the methods of working and that kind of thing. And he says in one part, for example, in the East, people tend to, if they have a plant that's growing, first of all, there's a huge difference between the East and the West. And here in the West, we have large extensions of fields and crops and super big. Whereas in Asia in general, if you go there, you will realize they have like little parcels or little, I don't know if parcels is the word, parcelas en español, in Spanish parcelas, but little fields, little places where they have their crops. And they usually tend to those plants or to those crops manually. They dig with their hands into the earth, the soil, and they are like more focused on each plant, we could say, because they have spaces that are reduced. And if they notice a plant, for example, needs to get a tutor, or I don't know if you call it a tutor, a stick for it to go around or to guide it, it's different from, because they say, okay, this particular plant needs this to be growing better, so I go and I tend to this plant. However, here in the West, we have such large fields that we need to plan ahead, and we need to manage and plan and also be prepared and prevent plague, prevent the crops to be I don't know, attacked by certain bugs, that kind of thing. And however, they just go and see, okay, this plant needs this specific treatment, and I go with this plant, and I do something. So it is a completely different approach. And he argues, and I think it's interesting, he argues that that kind of behavior also models the way you think. And yeah, I think it's interesting, at least. In the East, regarding this hierarchy, these levels, these classes, castes, they are more ethical because they are more flattened, and again, they tend to the plants specifically, or the animals, they go one by one, and if they have to. So they are more ethical, we could say, because if they focus on the actual person, on the actual animal, the actual plant, and they are amoral, which means, and I wanted to also make some notes about it, because I also said that art is amoral. It means that it has no morality. It's not immoral. I wanted to be clear about that. And it's also not judgmental. So it's in the middle. Just things are the way they are. And that's exactly what I also noticed in the East. They don't judge you. They don't have that much separation as we have here in the East, for example, in society, even though they have castes and that kind of thing, but they have their rules, that's for sure. But yeah, there are some other issues. I won't get exactly into there. But yet we can see that in the West, we are more separated, more segregated, and even though it would seem that we have more freedom, at the same time we are more like separated, and this is my opinion, maybe that's causing friction between each group with the other, and we are like, I don't know, women against men, and we have so many different little groups, and maybe we could just need, I don't know, to be respectful regardless of what you are, what you decide to be, what's your gender, and that kind of thing. But that's my opinion anyways. And I really would like to know what you think about this, these ideas that I've shared with you. Sorry that I dumped all the ideas to you, because I took notes and I was thinking about this. And I remember I had this book because I've been wanting to talk about East and West for some time now. And I think if I'm going to do this, I want it to be to bring something really valuable to the table, and I think this is really interesting. And it's not that well known because, as I said before, Haudricourt never wrote a book, so we only have articles because he wasn't interested in writing books. But yeah, I think it's interesting enough. And it's like a new way of seeing things. Again, from an agricultural engineer and a curious person mostly. So, well, that's it. I hope you like it, and if you have any ideas, or if you have been to, if you are an Asian person and have been to the West, you can comment, or if you are an Occidental person that's been living in the East, or have experienced it. I would like to know your experience, and if something of this resonates with you, or you think it's completely nonsense. So subscribe so you don't miss anything in the channel. And see you next time. Have fun.
Stay tuned for Ulua's next episode.